Well, while the nation has been focused on a net zero plan, something just, well, almost as significant is moving under the radar. News poll this month has seen the federal opposition continue its trajectory north, with the government diving south. With a 54 to 46 two-party preferred lead in the polls, Labor is shortening to win the next election. The news is not so good for Anthony Albanese. The public prefers Scott Morrison to run the economy. I caught up with the opposition leader earlier this week, and I started by asking him whether he's ready to lead a nation.
I am, and we are. I have an experienced team of people who've served in government. We will be the most experienced incoming Labor government in history if we're successful whenever the election is held. I've served as Deputy Prime Minister. I've served as Infrastructure Minister, as Communications Minister, Regional Development Minister. I've served in a range of portfolios, of course, in opposition, and I've been the leader of the government in the House of Representatives, including in the Minority Parliament. But for 6 years, I've held that office longer than anyone, continuously.
But what about the party? I'm worried about the party in that we wonder who the ALP now represents. We've heard a lot from Joel Fitzgibbon about who the party has turned against there for a while. Miners felt they weren't being represented by the ALP, and they voiced their disapproval of that at the last federal election in places like the Hunter. We see you as a party for working people. That's always been the tradition. A little bit green in more recent decades. We've seen an alliance between the Greens and Labor. That's not what the Labor Party person that's voted for you for many years wants. Who are you representing now? What do you stand for?
Well, we represent an overwhelming majority of the Australian people. We have three key themes going forward. One of those is secure work, making sure that we address issues like same job, same pay. I'll have a private members bill when Parliament resumes. We have people working next to each other in coal mines and in other jobs as well, who can earn less than $50,000, less than the person they're doing the same job next to, just because they're working for labour hire firms. Now, not all. In some cases it's appropriate, but we have some cowboys out there that are undermining our wages and conditions. We learnt this week that real wages aren't keeping up with the cost of living. We know that increased casualisation is an issue. People increasingly working in gig work. So secure work will be very much a focus. But the second is a better standard of living. So areas like cheaper childcare, making childcare, affordable childcare, a universal provision. Just like when a kid turns 5 years old, everyone accepts that they can go to school, they'll be looked after. Why is it that those early years aren't being looked after as well? More affordable housing and strengthening Medicare. So that's the second part of the component. And the third is a future made in Australia. I have a Buy Australian plan, for example, for our government.
But Dick Smith learnt the hard way. He learnt that you can put up a Buy Australia commodity company like he had, a supermarket virtually online. No one bought it.
Well, the fact is we can make more things here, and we can. I'll give you a practical example, Chris. We have in Australia a great capacity to manufacture trains. We used to manufacture them in Newcastle. We still do now in Maryborough. In Queensland, in Victoria, we're making trams, in WA under the McGowan government as well. What the coalition has done, every coalition government that's come to office has sent them offshore to other countries. And when they've come here, they're not fit for purpose. They've got to be remade. We have ferries here in Sydney that don't fit under the bridges on the Parramatta River. We have different gauges on Sydney's light rail system.
One of the things that comes out of the news poll recently is that the public seems to have a little bit more faith in Scott Morrison as an economic manager than they do you. That is not a good perception to have as you come into a federal election, is it?
Well, this government have presided over $1 trillion of debt. The last two budgets they've had in the last 18 months have produced $100 billion.
But we've been in the middle of a pandemic. Come on.
Yeah, but what's to show from it, Chris? What's to show from it?
Well, we bounced back very well after the first series of lockdowns.
What is...
Jobs are down to 4%.
What is the big infrastructure project? What is the legacy from $1 trillion of debt? Now, we had, when I was last in government and in charge of infrastructure in this country, we had the global financial crisis. Out of that, we have paid parental leave. We had the National Broadband Network, which has transformed some regional communities. We brought forward the full duplication of the Hume Highway. We brought forward the work on the Pacific Highway and on the Bruce Highway. We invested more in urban public transport in those 6 years than the previous 107
this government was just
years
trying
combined.
to keep people in jobs.
Well,
that was a bigger mountain to climb than what we've climbed at any stage.
Their priority, Chris, though, when it came to spending, was getting out a colour-coded map, depending upon what the marginality of a seat was. We think that the government could have invested more wisely, could have had a legacy, and they just don't. This government is nearing the end of its third term. What's the big economic reform that they've had? What's the big social reform that they've had? And on the environment, they're all over the shop on net zero by 2050.
I want to talk to you about net zero and their plan in just a second, but I also want to rewind the tape a little bit, as I do with my guests on a Sunday night. You were a houso from Camperdown. I mean
Absolutely.
this with a great deal of fondness. You're talking
proudly.
You're talking to a bloke from southwestern Sydney, so don't worry about that. And, you know, your only dream was to wear the red and green colours and see them play in a grand final, like I was as well. But you must have had an aspiration, an ambition in life. And was it politics? It wouldn't have been politics in a housing commission apart.
No, it certainly wasn't. I grew up with a single mum it was originally council housing there in Camperdown, opposite where the old children's hospital was.
Yep.
They're still there, the places, little two-storey brick places. And my aspiration was to work hard, and my mum wanted something better for me than she had. And I think that is what Australian aspiration is about. We all want better things for our kids than we enjoyed. He was crippled up, unfortunately, with rheumatoid arthritis, so she couldn't work. She was an invalid pensioner. So I know what it's like to do it tough. I know what it's like to live in a household where every dollar counts. And she also wanted me to have opportunities that she didn't. And it was a proud day when I went into the federal parliament, into the House of Representatives. Unfortunately, she didn't live, she had a tough life. She died at age 65. But what I had was security from a loving parent.
She did you a superb favour.
There's nothing more important than that.
You knew your father. Your mother told you early on that he died. It took 40-odd years before you were able to meet him. Tell us that story.
Well, my mum, having a child by herself in 1963, she was a good Catholic working-class woman. That was a difficult thing to do, and she was encouraged, as was the fashion of the time, to have me adopted out. She chose to keep me. There was no way she was going to give up her child. And she, though, in order, I guess, to restore, I mean, the word used is illegitimate for a child out of wedlock for a reason. There was a stain at that time. And so I was told, and everyone was told, that my father had died before I was born. And so I grew up thinking that. When I was old enough, she told me the truth of what had occurred, and that my father she'd met while overseas, and that he could still be living in Italy. She hadn't had any contact with him.
And you tracked him down?
And I tracked him down. And I got to meet him at age 46, and I got to take my son across to meet his grandfather. And so I have he had a family over there.
Bittersweet?
It was, he was very generous. It was warm. It was history. Relationships are complex things, Chris. So it was very positive. I still keep in contact with. I have a half brother, a half sister. So it ended up being very, very positive and fortunate.
Did you need that closure?
My father.
You think?
Well, I think for me, it was about knowing who I was.
Yeah.
And when I was growing up, particularly, my mother gave me his name, and she took his name. Albanese is a very Italian, obvious name. But getting to meet him, I think knowing where you're from is important. For some people, that's not possible. But I was able to find that, and I was able to meet him and to visit there on a few occasions and to have that contact. And when he was dying in 2013, he said, you know, I'm glad I found you.
Yeah, isn't it nice? I want to get back to current debates, current issues. In terms of persona, you don't have too much respect for the Prime Minister. I get the feeling that you, more than anyone, have gone the man, not the ball. That so often you've taken Scott Morrison on. Is that because you don't think much of him? Is that because you think he's a spiv? I get the feeling that you have no regard for the Prime Minister. Is that a fair call?
Look, I have a difficult relationship with him. That's truth. I respect the job that any Prime Minister does. Is really tough. But I'm just not sure how real he is, basically, is what it comes down to. And
is he their weakest link, do you think?
And I think Barnaby Joyce is hard to go past as someone who increasingly is erratic in his comments that are made, and he's the acting Prime Minister as we're speaking here, Chris.
Yeah. So let's talk about Barnaby Joyce and net zero. You also didn't give too much credence to the fact that the Liberal Party, the Prime Minister, spent a lot of time allowing Barnaby and his party to determine whether they would come on board with a net zero by 2050 policy. You thought, oh, what is he waiting for Barnaby's say-so for? And there was a mocking going on from members of your party at the time. But shouldn't they be given credit, because at least they spent the time to consider how the regions, how those jobs would be looked after before committing to this?
But it wasn't leadership. It was all about a pantomime where they were always going to agree. So I think it was very disingenuous, that process. We don't know what came out of that process. All we know is that Keith Pitt got a cabinet job and an increase in his salary.
If his net zero policy is a sham, as you and Chris Bowen said the other day, where's your plan, and what does that make your plan to net zero look like if his is a sham and he's got a plan?
Well, we've put forward really specific policies already. We do support net zero by 2050. We have, for the first budget reply, I had rewiring the nation. We need to fix electricity transmission in this country. So that, for example, the Snowy Hydro plant, you have this big project that we support. It's not going to be able to plug into the grid. You need to fix the grid.
Same as solar.
You need to fix the grid. It's the low-hanging fruit. And if you speak to someone like Kerry Schott, who was in charge of energy security in this country under the coalition government, she will tell you that. Any of the energy companies will tell you that.
All right, when are we going to see your plan?
That's one thing. Well, you've already seen. I'll tell you what you've seen. You've seen that. You've seen
EV.
Our plan for EVs, cheaper EVs, cutting taxes. You've seen our plan for new energy apprenticeships so that Australians can fit.
But we want to know how you're going to get to 2050.
I'm telling you, community batteries, so that we actually enable people to benefit from solar panels on roofs through community batteries.
And you won't consider nuclear?
And no. And
why not?
Because it doesn't stack up.
No, it does. 10 European nations got together and produced a statement this month that said it's not only reliable, it's independent, it's stable and it's affordable. Modular nuclear reactors.
And here in Australia, renewable energy is the cheapest form of new energy, and the markets is what determines where the investment is going, and it's all going one way.
But you're ignoring part of what could be a technologically futuristic, yes, but technologically advantageous energy source.
That's off way in the never ever. That has.
You'll never consider it, will you?
No.
You said that you're ready to govern, that you've got an experienced team. When will we get a chance to vote one way or the other?
Well, we don't know. That'll be up to
Are you looking at March?
The Prime Minister. Well, we're not writing off December 11 as a possibility that Scott Morrison comes back. He thinks the shambles that they've become, they can't hold it together with sticky tape for too much longer.
December 11.
That's possible. If not, March 5th.
Right.
Is, I think, a preferred date to be called after Australia Day. They can go to May. But the truth is, if they don't call an election for March, people will wonder why they're hanging on. It'll only because they don't think that they can keep the show together
Thank you very much for your time. I'm so glad you got the power to bring the couch back. It's sensational.
It is. We're socially distanced too. We're doing it all the right way, Chris.
Anthony Albanese, thank you for your time.
Been a pleasure. And to conclude, mate, we can't have me and you on the couch without saying 2022, 22 premierships for the Bunnies.
Rabbitohs, exactly.
It just has a ring to it, doesn't it?
There's a synchronicity to it, I admit. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much,
Okay.
mate.
That's all I've got time for tonight, but I'll be back at the same time.